Number 10, Terry Nichols. Convicted of 161 counts of first-degree slaughter, first-degree arson, and conspiracy by the state of Oklahoma for his part in the Oklahoma City Massacre of April 19, 1995. Also sentenced in federal court for chaos and 8 counts of involuntary manslaughter. This guy is trouble. Terry holds the record for most consecutive life sentences ever given to a single individual at 161 consecutive life sentences without parole. Due to such a large number of life sentences, adding no parole possibility, it can be also declared as the longest officially confirmed sentence ever handed in the world. Number 9, Gary Leon Ridgeway. Ridgeway, also known as the Green River Butcher, is an American serial executioner. He was initially convicted of 48 separate executions. As part of his plea bargain, another conviction was added, bringing the total number of convictions to 49, making him the second most prolific serial executioner in United States history according to confirmed executions. He ended the lives of many women in the US state of Washington during the 1980s and 90s. Most of Ridgeway's victims were alleged to be intimacy workers and other women in vulnerable circumstances. The press gave him his nickname after the first 5 victims were found in the Green River before his identity was known. He strangled his victims, usually by hand but sometimes using ligatures. After strangling them, he would dump their bodies in forested and overgrown areas in King County. On November 30th, 2001, as Ridgeway was leaving the Kenworth truck factory where he worked in Renton, Washington, he was arrested for the removal of 4 women, whose cases were linked to him through DNA profiling evidence. He was given 49 life sentences, 48 of them without parole, plus 480 years. Number 8, Chamoy Tipiaso. In the late 1960s, Chamoy Tipiaso started a chit fund called the May Chamoy Fund, which was made to look like an oil share with high returns. Due to Tipiaso's connections with the Air Force and Petroleum Authority, the fund was able to sustain itself for remarkably a long time. Her connections to the military were a huge factor in political and business power, and so its apparent military backing made the scheme seem legitimate. The scheme drew in 16,231 clients and was not shut down until the mid-1980s. The fund had a large number of politically powerful investors from the military and even the royal household, and as such, there were calls for the government to bail out the banks and the chit funds. After discussions with King Bhumibol Adulyadej, the nature of which were not made public, the May Chamoy Fund was shut down and Chamoy Tipiaso was arrested. She was sentenced to imprisonment for 141,078 years, but ended up only serving 8. Number 7, Dylann Roof. Perpetrator of the Charleston church tragedy, originally sentenced to execution in federal court for 9 counts of hate crimes, resulting in the victims passing away, 3 counts of hate crimes with intent to execute, 9 counts of obstruction to exercise religion resulting in executions, and 3 counts of obstruction to exercise religion using a dangerous weapon. In the South Carolina State Court, Roof pleaded guilty to 9 counts of slaughter, 3 counts of attempted slaughter, and 1 count of possession of a firearm during the commission of a violent crime. Life was recommended for the 9 executions, 30 years for the 3 attempted executions, and 5 years for the possession. Currently incarcerated and awaiting execution at United States Penitentiary, Terre Haute, Indiana. Dylann was given 9 life sentences plus 95 years. Number 6, Moses Sotol. Moses Sotol was the ABC butcher of South Africa and holds a substantial sentence for his crimes. He appeared to be a mild-mannered individual to those around him. At the time of his crimes, he was managing a shell organization, Youth Against Human Abuse, ostensibly devoted to the eradication of abuse. After committing his crimes in Attridgeville near Pretoria, Sotol moved his focus to Boksburg and eventually to Cleveland. By 1995, he had claimed over 30 victims, sparking nationwide panic. In some cases, he would later phone the victims' families for no apparent reason other than to taunt them. At one point, President Nelson Mandela visited Boksburg in prison to appeal for public assistance in apprehending the butcher. Sotol was sentenced to 2,410 years with a minimum of 930 years. Number 5, Bernard Henry McGinn. McGinn was born into an Irish Republican family in Castleblaney, County Monaghan, Ireland. In 1978, Desi O'Hare and McGinn ended Thomas Johnston, a former member of the UDR in Katy, South Armagh. In 1979, McGinn was arrested at a disused farmhouse and charged with possession of explosives. He failed to turn up at his trial and was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment in absentia. After several months on the run, he was arrested in Dundalk following a 27-hour siege, during which he held a family hostage with a pistol and a hand grenade. McGinn was released from prison in 1987 and joined the IRA's South Armagh Brigade. Initially viewed as an outsider, within several years he became a trusted member of the brigade, helping assemble devices used by the IRA in England. The devices made went on to cause mass tragedies, which landed him a 490-year sentence. Number 4. Nathan Dunlap. On December 14th, 1993, 4 employees were shot and executed, and a 5th employee was seriously injured at a Chuck E. Cheese's restaurant in Aurora, Colorado, United States. The perpetrator, 19-year-old Nathan Dunlap, a former employee of the restaurant, was frustrated about being fired 5 months prior to the shooting and sought revenge by committing the attack. He fled the scene of the shooting with stolen money and restaurant items. Dunlap was found guilty over 4 counts of first-degree slaughter, attempted slaughter, and other charges, and was sentenced to execution by lethal injection on May 17, 1996. A judge initially set an execution date for him in August 2013, but Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper signed a temporary reprieve that would postpone Dunlap's execution date. Dunlap's execution sentence was commuted to life in prison without parole in 2020 after Colorado abolished the execution penalty. He was given 1 life sentence without parole plus 108 years. Number 3. Pune Jail. Pune was convicted of 2,653 counts of fraud. He admitted running a Ponzi scheme whereby he promised investors artificially high financial returns. About 40,000 people were persuaded to pour more than $160 million into his companies. Prosecutors told the court that Pune organized seminars where attendees were encouraged to invest in what he said were businesses linked to property development, beauty, used cars, and exports, among other things. They recommended 5 years for each count and an additional 10 years, totaling 13,275 years. Due to his confession, his sentence was halved to 6,637 years and 6 months. Under Thailand law, though, a convicted fraudster can't serve above 20 years. He will be released in 2037. Number 2. Billy Glenn Woolsey and Jackie Dean Whitlock. The pair broke out of Alfalfa County Jail in Oklahoma. Woolsey was being held on kidnap charges, and Whitlock had been sentenced to 10 years for receiving stolen property. The men overpowered an officer and stole his police car, later abandoning the car but taking with them an AR-15 automatic rifle and an M1 carbine, which they used to steal a pickup truck from an oil field worker. When they were located 2 days later, they led police on a 32-mile high-speed chase through Bryan and Marshall counties, exchanging gunfire with them. 2 officers were shot, later making a full recovery, and 1 more was treated for injuries from broken glass. A Bryan County judge gave them 2,000 years each, 1,000 years for shooting with intent to end a life, 500 years for possession of stolen property, and 500 years for running a roadblock. Tried separately in Marshall County, they additionally each received 2 life sentences and 20 years. At number 1, opichort and proposen. Originally sentenced to 1,446 years for defrauding the public, they were arrested after numerous complaints. The Lamegate Seafood restaurant had begun selling various food vouchers that required customers to pay in advance. One such deal offered a seafood meal at $28 for 10 people, far cheaper than their usual prices. Initially, those who bought the vouchers were able to claim their meals at the restaurant, but a long waiting list meant an advance booking of up to several months. But by March, the company announced its closure, claiming that it could not get hold of enough seafood to meet the demand. It offered to refund customers who had bought vouchers. About 375 out of 818 customers who complained got their money back. The 2 were arrested, later convicted and sentenced to 1,446 years, although their sentences were cut in half due to the guilty plea. It seems that prisons are scary no matter what. It's full of prisoners, it's scary because of the inmates. It's empty, well, it's haunted. There really is no winner. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are the top 10 most haunted prisons in the world. Make sure you subscribe and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, we all go a little mad sometimes. Number 10, Alcatraz. The Rock was the ultimate American prison. It was the place where scores of the country's worst criminal offenders, bloodletters, bad men, and escape artists called the end of the line. The initial prison was built in 1859, but fell into disuse by the 1920s. It was then reopened in 1933 to be an escape-proof federal prison. It was a brutal place of punishment and confinement with few privileges. In 1946, several inmates attempted a violent and bloody escape from the Rock, but failed. There were a handful of other escapes, but only one successful escape in 1962. Using handmade rubber rafts and dummies with real hair, vanished into the dark waters of the bay. Alcatraz was closed down 1 year later, in 1963. Regarded as one of America's most haunted places, ghosts have been widely reported ever since, even by staff members of the National Park Service, which now operates the property. Ghosts have been sighted along with strange sounds, screams, yells, weeping, and eerie music. Number 9. Ohio State Reformatory. The Ohio State Reformatory, made famous in the film The Shawshank Redemption, was opened in 1896, and it saw untold thousands of prisoners during its years of operation. And while once applauded as a place that could humanely reform first-time offenders, the conditions deteriorated to the point that it became known for abuse, torture, and execution. Already considered overcrowded and inhumane by the 1930s, the massive prison was kept open until 1986, even after a federal lawsuit was filed by the inmates that cited that it was unfit for human occupation. Since the closing of the reformatory, stories have circulated that it is haunted by the tormented spirits of former inmates, guards, and prison officials who have simply never left. Apparitions have been reported, footsteps have been heard, and unsettling encounters have taken place in the cells where the inmates once lived, suffered, and sometimes passed away. Number 8. Lake County Jail. The Lake County Jail, located in the county seat of Crown Point, was built in 1908 and enlarged 20 years later. At that time, county sheriffs were required to live at the jail, and so the combined residence and jail included all the facilities needed for its purpose as a law enforcement institution. Located within the walls were the family's living area, warden's residence, department offices, 150 cells, maximum security accommodations, institutional kitchen, food storage, heating and cooling systems, barber shop, and a garage. It was considered to be one of the finest in Indiana and thought to be escape-proof. However, on March 3rd, 1934, gangster John Dillinger proved it to be otherwise when he made a daring escape that gave the jail its continuing infamy. The jail remained in operation until the 1970s, when it became a historic site. As restoration has continued over the last 2 decades, stories have emerged about a haunting at the jail. Apparitions have been seen in cells and corridors, strange photographs have been taken, doors open and close by themselves, lights turn on and off, and disembodied footsteps and voices have been reported by volunteers and visitors alike. What do you think they have in the garage? Comment down below. I personally think it's a lotus. Number 7. Pottawatomie County Jail. Built in 1885, the old Pottawatomie County Jail is one of the most unusual houses of incarceration in America. The jail has a 3-tier cell block with 10 cells on each tier. It was originally designed to rotate continuously throughout the night by means of a water wheel in the basement, earning it the nickname of the Squirrel Cage Jail. In this way, all of the prisoners could be watched from a central location. Unfortunately, the 45-ton cell block was simply too heavy to work right, and it became stuck frequently. Eventually, the jailers gave up on the plan and a night guard had to be hired. The cylinder continued to be used until 1960, when a prison passed in his cell and the cell block jammed, trapping the body in the cell for several days. After that, cell doors were cut into every cell. The jail was closed down in 1969, and during its history, 4 passes occurred within its walls. One man passed away from a heart attack, another in a fall when he tried to write his name on the ceiling, another ended himself in his cell, and the last after an accident when an officer accidentally shot himself in the confusion of protecting the jail from an angry mob during the farmers' holiday strike of 1932. It's no surprise that these unlucky individuals, along with others, are believed to still linger at the old jail. Number 6. West Virginia Penitentiary. The prison was built on the edge of Moundsville in 1866. The prison remained open for 129 years, finally closing down in 1995. During that time, the structure housed thousands of prisoners. Many lost their lives here through both state-sanctioned executions and during prison violence. Since its closure, the prison has become known as one of the most haunted sites in history. Staff members and visitors alike have reported ghosts in North Hall, where the most dangerous inmates were housed, in the execution chamber where Old Sparky sent many to an early grave, and the Hole, a brutal solitary confinement area that often drove inmates to insanity and thoughts of ending themselves, with passings, violence, executions, and horrible conditions combining to make a terrifying haunting. Ghost hunters have flocked to the former penitentiary over the years. Visitors claim to have experienced the sound of phantom footsteps, voices and noises that have no explanation, inexplicable cold chills, overwhelming feelings of panic, and more. Number 5. Missouri State Prison. During its operation, it saw many infamous prisoners, including Charles Pretty Boy Floyd, James Earl Ray, and Bobby Greenlee's kidnappers Carl Austin Hall and Bonnie Heady. They were executed at the prison. In 1954, there was a major riot at the penitentiary. The Missouri State Highway Patrol, Missouri National Guard, and police departments from Jefferson City, St. Louis, and Kansas City, Missouri, were called in to help quell the disturbance. When it was all over, 4 inmates had been executed, 29 had been injured, and there had been 1 attempt on someone's own life. 4 guards had been seriously injured and several buildings had been burned. During its operation, 40 inmates were executed in the gas chamber, and Time magazine once called it the bloodiest 47 acres in America for the frequent violence inside its walls. It probably comes as no surprise that since its closure, the penitentiary has become a hotspot for paranormal activity. Staff members and visitors have reported dozens of eerie encounters with lingering spirits, which have been seen, heard, and encountered firsthand. Number 4. Shrewsbury Prison. The Shrewsbury Prison in Shropshire is one of the oldest prisons in the UK, and in addition to its dark history, it's a given that this jail is one of the most haunted in the UK as well. This prison opened up all the way back in 1793, all the way until 2013, meaning 2 centuries of people went through this place. During the Victorian period, large audiences would assemble to see public executions, some of which were people who had been given the execution penalty for crimes like stealing bread. Apart from that, this prison went through many other public executions, torturing, and many taking their own lives. Visitors to the prison claim that a shadow man lurks in the prison's A-wing. It's said that he's a former police officer, since they are known to scare people away from the A-wing as if they were still working their job. Oddly enough, this jail has an escape room within the cells of the former inmates, so if you were looking for something for a real experience, that would be your best bet, just for the price of £69. Number 3. Wyoming Territorial Prison. The Wyoming Territorial Prison in the city of Laramie opened its doors in 1873, and over its time of being active, it would have many problems with overcrowding, causing many prisoners to be bunched together in already terrible living conditions. This prison is not like the other typical haunted prisons. It didn't have horrific executions, nor did it have riots or mistreatment. Instead, this prison is haunted due to a select few spirits that chose to stick around here for whatever reason. The spirit is believed to be that of Julius Greenwelch, who was an inmate in the 1890s. He was set there because he executed his wife after finding her at his favorite brothel. During his days at the prison, he became so notorious for his talent in cigar rolling that he was allowed to set up a cigar making business while behind bars. However, in a few years he would pass away from a heart attack, causing his business to never grow the way he envisioned. Ever since, the prison has parts of it smell like cigar smoke, with the guards and locals claiming the smell is the spirit of Julius. Number 2. Napier Prison. Located in Napier Hill, New Zealand is the Napier Prison. Built in 1862, this prison lasted over 130 years until it eventually closed in 1993. Now, this prison was once used as an orphanage and then a psychiatric hospital, so it's really no surprise at all that this place is considered one of the most haunted places in New Zealand. During the time it was active, this place was the last place many people saw in their lives, because many execution sentences were done inside of this prison. The most notorious of the execution sentences was the one given to Roland Edwards. He was a mass slaughterer who was sentenced to execution in the gallows, but ever since, he has been said to haunt the prison with a special appearance on the anniversary of his passing. He passed away on July 15th, so this is when many paranormal investigators visit the prison for the chance to speak to Roland. Now, there are ghost tours that go through the prison, but make sure you never go alone, because nighttime security guards often report unexplained footsteps and doors slamming on their own when they walk the grounds alone. Number 1. Wyoming Frontier Prison. Located in Rawlins, Wyoming, the Wyoming Frontier Prison has the reputation of being one of the toughest prisons in the Wild West. Opened in 1901, it housed some of the most violent inmates, featured a dungeon, botched executions, and was known for rampant violence. Now a museum, employees and visitors alike have reported ghostly encounters. There have been apparitions spotted in the cell blocks and reports of a malevolent spirit in the dungeon who has threatened visitors. The prison is so notorious that it was featured on an episode of Travel Channel's Ghost Adventures, and ghost hunters have captured orbs on camera. The museum offers haunted Halloween night tours if you want to have a ghostly encounter of your own. Ever wonder what the weirdest, scariest, most insane stories come from prison? Well, I wish I wasn't so curious, because some of these had me staying awake at night. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are 10 scary prison horror stories that actually happened. Anyways, it's time to go to prison. At number 10, something's wrong in the cafeteria. An inmate in a female prison describes one of her experiences in the prison chow hall. There was a woman there. She had tried to wipe out her mother, and while the mother was escaping, she ran her over, put it in reverse, floored it back over her again, and finally put it in drive over her one last time. The mother was actually extremely harmful and was in the same prison in a different part. The inmate goes on, explaining the odd behavior of the prisoner. The daughter would always have her arms in her shirt. You'd only see her arms when she was sitting, like eating or something. She's across from me one day, eating, and I see her drop a pile of something. I immediately was like, what the heck? You can't have stuff in the chow hall. What is this girl doing? It was kind of loud when she dropped it, so it wasn't laundry. It looked kind of like meat. How and why does she have meat? We're eating spaghetti right now. Suddenly, the inmate realized what the woman dropped. That's her innards, just falling out of her torso onto the floor. She's struggling to gather all of it. It looks slippery. After that, I noticed her dropping her innards onto the floor on a regular basis and had to stop being around her at all. That's freaky. You'd think that prison doctors would sew her back up. At number 9, a new inmate describes their first week in prison and sitting at the wrong table. The first week of my 12-year prison set was the worst. I was a skinny 20-year-old with no criminal history, and it takes a while to learn that most people are mostly talk. I accidentally sat at the black table at chow, made a point of staying there and eating with them when they showed up to avoid offending them, was labeled a race traitor by the whites, and was told someone would be coming to hurt me. Nobody came, as most people don't want to be inconvenienced with a long stint in the hole for harming someone for something so small. But I slept with a pen cap hooked to my watch band, holding a sharp pencil against my wrist in case I had to jab someone in defense. Living for days with the crippling fear of imminent doom messed with my nerves. My hands shake a little now. At number 8, controlling your nerves is hard for anyone. Knowing when to show them and when to be completely straight-faced is harder. Day 1. Everything is just as scary as can be. You don't really know where you will be safe, if anywhere. Every time you're passing someone, are they going to shank you? Are they going to cold punch you in the face? Chow time was total panic mode. Hundreds of merciless thugs in a close group outnumbering the guards 25-1. If something went down, you would be gone before order was restored. When incidents happen, you have to hide, but not cower. You have to keep your back to the wall so you can fend off any incoming strikes. As days went on, you became more aware of when to be alarmed, but there are plenty of sneak attacks that come out when all is calm. One time during chow, a squad of a few people were coming to get someone and they had to pass my direction. They weren't coming after me, but I didn't know that until they passed me. That was the most scary moment. I was almost frozen, yet ready to throw down. You can't show emotions in these situations either. You can't let the dude sitting across from you see you panicking. At number 7. Being a new inmate is hard enough. What makes it harder is when something crazy happens on your first day. Here's a horror story from an inmate's first day in jail. My very first time in jail, when I was 18, was a bit of a trip. Went through the whole entry process where they make you feel like a piece of garbage, threaten you, etc. Then the group I was with were split up to head to different cell blocks. My foot was barely through the cell door when a siren started blaring and we were told to face the wall and not move. A bunch of guards rushed the cell block, and after a couple of minutes, they rushed a guy covered in blood past us, followed by a guy I assumed was the cause of the blood. Find out later that they had an argument about a book. So one guy slashed the other's face repeatedly with a razor blade melted into a toothbrush. I thought that my entire stay was going to be filled with stuff like that, but I lucked out and knew someone in there, so I actually had it pretty easy. At number 6, an inmate describes the sudden switch in culture, purpose, and the norms of actions. I suppose seeing people getting taken advantage of all the time and then not caring was the worst. New guys coming in and getting ripped off on trades and stuff. People with social, developmental issues just getting their food taken from them. Also, the psychology of people without goals gets weird. What was worse was just becoming a part of that world. There are so many people there that have their rights taken away from them on a regular basis and don't care anymore. They choose to place value on being able to make others fear them. They stop thinking about the world beyond the walls and just get all wrapped up in the weird culture of the place. At number 5, an inmate tells us what they think about the prison system and how it affects people inside and outside. I also think people underestimate how much our prison system really hurts people. Being in for not a long time and in a low-risk tank didn't matter. Ended up with some PTSD. I couldn't fall asleep without a knife in my hand for the first 4 months I was released. I had nightmares and didn't sleep a night through sober for the same period of time. Our system does nothing to rehabilitate anyone. They throw you all together and take people who make stupid mistakes and expose them to hardened criminals who happen to be pretty good at leaving impressions on people. At number 4, this guard explains his scariest experience at Rikers Island. I used to work as a prison guard on Rikers Island. I remember one experience that really sent a shiver down my spine. Still does, actually. This was when I was a bit of a novice. I had sort of an idea it would be hard, but I didn't know how hard. I was passing out pieces of chicken to the inmates, and I handed a piece to this tall, skinny guy, and he still had his hand out. Give me another one. I figured he was trying to test my limits since I was the newest guard, so of course I told him no, because I didn't think I should send the message I could be pushed around. He got kind of mad, but for the time being, he cooperated. A couple days later, that same guy motioned for me to come over. Hey, don't you live on my exact address, and your wife's name is my wife's name? I was stunned for a second there. I still have no idea how he found that out. You know, a little extra chicken is nice once in a while. At number 3, a bone-chilling occult incident happened to a guard at this prison. Here's what he said happened. One night, I was working in a different area, but I got a call on the radio. Flash, flash, flash. Offender in need of emergency medical care. That was the initiation of ICS, and usually meant there was a problem. Usually a fight or severe injury. Turns out, this was an execution, and I swear this is something out of True Detective. There's an inmate face down in his bunk, tied up with bed sheets, deceased, with blood everywhere. The executed inmate was shirtless and had runes carved into his back. The other inmate was curled into a ball, muttering, "Demons, demons." It turns out the executed inmate wasn't actually passed away, but really close to it. As for the executioner, no one could get a motive. One of the neighboring cellmates said he heard everything and described all the screams and the inmate saying that demons are coming. At number 2, an escape plan that was found out by a guard early. I was a correctional officer in a maximum security prison for 7 years. There were 5 inmates with life sentences on a prisoner work crew that I supervised that were planning an escape. One of my confidential informants calmly walked into my office one day. It told me that they were planning on removing me in order to escape. That night, I searched the warehouse and found 14 shanks with my name on them. We got all the bad guys in the end. No one got hurt. At number 1, a story so crazy it sounds straight from a movie for our number 1 spot. I spoke to a former inmate after his release who had developed severe PTSD from some of the things he witnessed while incarcerated. One of the stories was that he was playing cards with some guys, and one of them was smoking a cigarette. Another inmate who was not playing with them approached the table and asked the guy smoking if he could get shorts on the cigarette. Shorts means before you finish smoking, you gave the cigarette to someone else, so they got the last few puffs of the cigarette before putting it out. The smoker agreed. The inmate wandered off and they went back to playing cards. Well, the guy playing cards must have forgotten and finished the cigarette. A little while later, the inmate came back to the table asking for the short, and the guy at the table told him that he had forgotten about it and finished the cigarette. Guy wanders off again and they go back to playing cards. Shortly afterwards, the inmate who wanted the shorts comes back to the table, comes up behind the player, pulls his head back and starts shanking him with a pen. Hopefully you'll never need this information, but if you do end up in prison sometime in the future, this video might be useful. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are the top 10 scary things no one tells you about prison. Make sure to subscribe and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, let's get going. Number 10, the food. The food served at prisons is most known for being worse than a school cafeteria. The conditions at many institutions in the United States are being accused of starving their inmates with portions that are not even enough to fill a 5-year-old child, according to an inmate. Records have shown that the food not only tastes terrible, but has on one occasion caused an inmate to lose 90 pounds in less than 6 months due to the small portions. Here's what the average meal includes at Georgia Gordon County Jail. For breakfast, half a cup of canned fruit, half a cup of fruit juice, optional coffee, 1 cup of cold cereal, and 1 cup of 2% milk, 3 servings of margarine, 1 biscuit, and 1.5 cups of country gravy. Sounds like a lot, right? Well, that's because the inmates are not served lunch and are fed 10 to 14 hours apart. Number 9, the importance of money. You know how the saying goes, money rules the world. In prison, anything you want to do that involves the outside world requires a stack of cash. In prison, the average price monthly to keep in touch with the outside world is $588. $588 buys you 300 phone minutes, the monthly limit, at 21 cents a minute for domestic long distance calls, 2,700 monthly minutes of emailing, 5 monthly video visits, and the maximum monthly limit at commissary. One inmate had this to say: "My friend was my iron girl for $10 a month. She ironed my khaki uniform 5 days a week. That was her hustle. The day before commissary, she would show up at my cell door with a list. On a scrap of paper were $10 worth of commissary items, 2 bags of tortilla chips, a toothbrush, and a box of laundry soap for a month's work." Number 8, what commissary is. Commissary is a way for prisoners to still contribute to the economy while locked up. Yes, you heard that right. Inmates are basically forced to contribute to the economy by purchasing extremely marked up things while in prison just to sustain themselves. The items sold at commissary often vary from extra snacks like tortilla chips mentioned earlier, to toiletries like toilet paper, tissues. They even sell soap occasionally. The Texas prison system alone generated $100 million in revenue in 2009. There is also a limit placed on each inmate on how much money they are allowed to spend per month on commissary. Number 7, jobs in prison. Prison jobs are very common. most of them being derivatives from one main job, because some prisons require every prisoner to have a job, but not many jobs are available to start with. The occupations have been trickled down and changed. Take for instance a janitor. Seems straightforward, but it's anything but. Since everyone needs a job, janitors will have specific areas they must mop, from one end of the cell block to the middle. Then someone else goes from the middle to the other end. There are jobs for swatting flies, handing out cups during chow time, and even helping in the kitchen if you're lucky. Number 6. How many guards there really are. This one is more scary for the guards than the inmates. Most prisons are very overcrowded. This means that there is a huge disparity in the number of guards and inmates. Sometimes the ratio of guards to inmates is as crazy as only 1 guard to 100 inmates. This means that if things got out of hand, perhaps during a prison break, riot, or even just a fight, the guards could be overwhelmed, and this has happened before multiple times. Guards aren't invincible. Although the conditions in prison are very hard for prisoners, that doesn't mean they can't find a way to cause chaos. If a fight or a riot were to start, the entire prison could be engulfed in it, and the guards could be perhaps overwhelmed. Number 5. Speaking of riots, did you know that inmates prepare for riots? Contrary to popular belief, prison riots are well planned. One correctional officer said this about the topic: inmates train for riots. At yard time, you'll see a ton of them doing martial arts together. Sometimes they'll start a fight with 3 or 4 guys just to see what our response is. That way they're able to work up a counter for it. They figure out what our moves are, and then they practice their methods for beating us while we watch. You'd think we might be able to turn that right around and train to counter their new methods, but again, there's no money for training. Number 4. The mean guards actually don't last all that long. We've all heard of mean prison guards treating the inmates poorly. In every prison movie, there's that cliche of a correctional officer yelling at the inmates and being rude or disrespectful.
You address me as Mr. Correctional Officer.
One correctional officer actually shared his experience with one of these guards. We had one lieutenant come in and treat the inmates like dirt, calling them names and acting like the hard guards from the movies. What he didn't account for is how much time you have to spend alone with these guys. One day, he went to investigate a fight between 2 inmates, but it turned out to be a diversion. 2 other inmates came up from behind and ambushed him. He was stabbed 61 times before he could signal the officer in the control room to open the door and let him in. He survived, but he's not exactly running marathons these days. As you can tell, the guards have to respect the prisoners, as they have a disadvantage with how many guards there are compared to inmates. Number 3. The inmates are always listening. One guard might spill his heart to another guard about his impending divorce without realizing that the prisoner working as a janitor in the next room is listening in. Then that dude sells the information to an inmate with a grudge, and boom, the whole prison knows Sergeant Peters couldn't satisfy his wife. You could spend 2 or 3 weeks working a day shift and then get shoved over to a graveyard shift at a moment's notice. It affects you. Exhaustion slows down your reflexes, and guys with slow reflexes don't do so great against well-rested dudes rushing them with knives. Well, the inmates know when our schedules change, and they take advantage of that too. Again, they're always watching, looking for a weakness. A correctional officer had that to say about the topic. Number 2. The boredom. Have you ever been put in timeout as a kid and had to look at a wall or something for like 5 minutes? I know I have, and I usually can't even wait for 5 minutes because of the boredom. Prison is like being on timeout, but it's for months or years on end. Prisoners often have very little to do inside, most of them occupying themselves with jobs if they can. If the prisoner has some free time, they'll probably be reading books, studying textbooks, writing poetry, and even painting. A lot of inmates become interested in the arts while inside, as it gives them a source of creative freedom and endless imagination. Number 1. Prison ingenuity. Inmates locked up for a long time have to make do with what they have available to them. Inmates aren't allowed to indulge in certain beverages, so they make it themselves. There have been many reports over the years of prisoners creating some sort of prison wine called Pruno. Pruno is made in their toilets, where they ferment fruits to get a form of a certain chemical that makes people woozy. The prison wine isn't as strong as the real thing and has some side effects, like sometimes making inmates enraged and crazy. Inmates have also found ways to get tattoos while inside with makeshift tools and ink. If you see any of these guys in prison, you're probably gonna have a bad day. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are the top 10 most feared men in prison. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, let's look into it. Number 10. Pascal Payet. Let's count up the things he's done to get himself into French prison. His original sentence was 30 years for an execution in 1997. Next, he got 6 years for a jailbreak in 2001, and then 7 years for organizing a 2003 jailbreak, another 5 years for a jailbreak in 2007, and finally, 15 years for armed robberies and assaults on police while an escaped prisoner in 2007. All of those crimes give him a grand total of 63 years. By July 2007, Payet was one of the most closely surveyed prisoners in France and was never kept at the same prison for more than 6 months. He had been officially classified as a prisoner under especially high surveillance and placed in solitary confinement. Despite these measures, on July 14, 2007, taking advantage of Bastille Day celebrations, 4 masked men hijacked a helicopter from Cannes, Mandelieu Airport. They used it to free Payet from his solitary confinement in a prison in Grasse. Number 9. Alfred George Hines. Hines was an amazing escape artist. He escaped from Nottingham Prison after sneaking through the locked doors and over a 20-foot prison wall, for which he became known in the press as Houdini Hines. He worked as a builder-decorator in Ireland and throughout Europe until his arrest by detectives of Scotland Yard in 1956 after 248 days as a fugitive. After his arrest, Hines brought a lawsuit against authorities charging the prison commissioners with illegal arrest and used the incident as a means to plan his next escape by having a padlock smuggled into him while at the law courts. 2 guards escorted him to the toilet, but when they removed his handcuffs, Hines bundled the men into the cubicle and snapped the padlock onto screw eyes that his accomplices had earlier fixed to the door. He escaped into the crowd on Fleet Street, but was captured at an airport 5 hours later. Hines would make his 3rd escape from Chelmsford Prison less than a year later. He then returned to Ireland, where he lived for 2 years as a used car dealer under the name William Herpert Bishop, before his arrest after being stopped in an unregistered car. Number 8. Jack Sheppard. Jack Sheppard is perhaps the most celebrated criminal in England's history. He was originally arrested in 1724 after thieving and burglary. The man then went on to escape 4 times from prison, each time in an extravagant manner and being reported on heavily. Sheppard was as known for his attempts to escape from prison as he was for his crimes. An autobiographical narrative, thought to have been ghostwritten by Daniel Defoe, was sold at his execution, quickly followed by popular plays. The characters of Macheath in John Gay's The Beggar's Opera in 1728 was based on Sheppard, keeping him in the limelight for over 100 years. He returned to the public consciousness around 1840, when William Harrison Ainsworth wrote a novel entitled Jack Sheppard, with illustrations by George Cruikshank. The popularity of his tale and the fear that others would be drawn to emulate his behavior led the authorities to refuse to license any plays in London with Jack Sheppard in the title for 40 years. Number 7. Frank Lee Morris. Frank Morris was born in Washington, D.C. His parents abandoned him when he was 11, so he spent the rest of his childhood in foster homes, an orphan. He was convicted of his first criminal offense at 13, and by his late teens had been arrested for crimes ranging from narcotics possession to armed robbery. He spent most of his early years in jail serving lunch to prisoners. Later, he was arrested for grand larceny in Miami Beach, car theft, and armed robbery. Morris reportedly ranked in the top 2% of the general population in intelligence, as measured by IQ testing. He had an IQ of 133. He served time in Florida and Georgia, then escaped from the Louisiana State Penitentiary while serving 10 years for bank robbery. He was recaptured a year later while committing a burglary and sent to Alcatraz on January 20th, 1960 as inmate number AZ-1441. He was a part of the infamous 5-person crew who managed to escape Alcatraz. The crew used a raft made of raincoats and fake heads they'd sculpted during their time there to trick the guards. Number 6. Richard Lee McNair. McNair was sent to prison for a robbery gone wrong, ending in the execution of a man and another man being shot 4 times. He has escaped multiple times from several prisons, but managed to dissuade police from sending him to a maximum security prison because it would be too far for his parents for them to visit. He then acquired a job at the prison fixing mailbag. After several months, McNair designed a way to leave the prison by hiding in a pallet of mailbags he'd fixed, and that was shrink wrap. He waited for a forklift to deliver him to a truck, which drove him an hour and 15 minutes away from the prison, where he cut himself out and began jogging off. Hours after escape from Pollock, McNair was stopped by police officer Carl Bordelon. McNair had no identification and proceeded to give Officer Bordelon the alias of Robert Jones. When asked again 5 minutes later, he gave a different alias, Jimmy Jones, though the officer did not notice the different answer. McNair laughed and joked with the officer, and even as the officer got a matching description of the inmate, McNair appeared collected and calm. He successfully convinced Bordelon that he was jogging and in town to help on a post-Katrina roofing project, allowing him to go back to jogging within 10 minutes. Number 5. J. Junior Sigler and his loyal family and friends. In his 8th year of a 20-year jail sentence, J. Junior Sigler, an inmate charged with armed robbery at the infamous Everglades Correctional Institution, decided to plan a prison escape strategy that saw saw him escape from prison with the help of his mother, Sandra Sigler, and a few of his friends. He escaped in broad daylight when 3 of his friends rammed an 18-wheeled truck through 4 prison fences, followed by a car driven by his mother. After escaping successfully, Jay and his friends swapped vehicles at a local mall. Jay was executed in an attempt to flee after realizing that they were being followed. The car he was driving slammed into an oncoming vehicle, resulting in his passing. Number 4. Antonio Ferrara. Ferrara, 35, who emigrated to France with his family in the 1980s, was in Fresnes Prison in Val-de-Marne, having been jailed for bank robbery. He escaped when a gang set fire to cars in the local area to create a diversion, before raking the guard posts with automatic rifles and smashing down the door and interior walls with rocket launchers. They gave Ferrara explosives that allowed him to blow off the bars of his cell. He had previously arranged to commit a minor act of disobedience so as to be placed in a punishment wing, which was well located for the escape. It took 3 days of deliberations for the verdict to be pronounced at the Cour d'Assises de Paris after a 10-week trial. In total, 18 accomplices were sentenced, while 2 suspects were acquitted. Punishments ranged from suspended sentences to a variety of jail terms, including 4 of 15 years each. The men were convicted of crimes including aiding and abetting escape, destroying goods with explosives, burning cars, and transporting weapons. Number 3. Stephen J. Russell. Stephen J. Russell is an American con artist, known for escaping from prison multiple times. On March 20th, 1998, Russell posed as a millionaire from Virginia in an attempt to legitimize a $75,000 loan from Nations Bank in Dallas. When bank officials became suspicious and alerted the police, Russell feigned a heart attack and was transported to the hospital. Russell was placed on security watch, but he impersonated an FBI agent and called the hospital on his cell phone to tell them he could be released. U.S. Marshals later tracked down Russell in Florida, where they arrested him on April 5th, 1998, when he went to retrieve the facts. Russell was sentenced to a total of 144 years in prison, 99 years for the escapes, and 45 years for subsequent scams. Number 2. Jason Barnum. The eyeball man Jason Barnum was sentenced to 22 years in prison for shooting an Alaska police officer. Barnum's offenses were driven by a serious substance addiction, reports The Independent. What made him even more dangerous and intimidating was his tattoo-filled visage. Barnum had one of his eyeballs completely tattooed. The shooting happened when police were investigating home burglaries and car thefts. Officers were inspecting a hotel in 2012 when Barnum opened fire from a bathroom. 2 officers shot back, striking Barnum in the arm, and 1 officer was injured. Barnum later admitted to committing thefts and burglaries to feed a substance addiction. Number 1. Thomas Silverstein. Thomas Edward Silverstein was an American criminal who spent the last 42 years of his life in prison after being convicted of 4 separate executions while imprisoned for armed robbery, one of which was overturned. Silverstein spent the last 36 years of his life in solitary confinement for executing corrections officer Merle Klutz at the Marion Penitentiary in Illinois. Prison authorities described him as a brutal executioner and a former leader of the Aryan Brotherhood prison gang. Silverstein maintained that the dehumanizing conditions inside the prison system contributed to the 3 executions he committed. He was held in a specially designed cell in what is called Range 13 at ADX Florence Federal Penitentiary in Colorado. He was the longest held prisoner in solitary confinement within the Bureau of Prisons at the time of his passing. Many prison guards refused to talk to Silverstein out of respect for Klutz. At number 10, we have Cellular Jail, also known as Kalapani. This prison is notorious for terrible conditions for the inmates. Reportedly, prisoners could face torture, medical tests, forced labor, and, for many, execution. The inmates have tried to go on hunger strikes to protest the terrible conditions. However, the guards began force-feeding them anyways. The prison is located in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and being sent here is the equivalent of a living execution. If a prisoner were to complain, they'd be subject to extreme torture methods. One of them being that they would be forced to wear coarse clothing that was rough on their skin and scratch their skin for 3 months. Many escapes were attempted, but prisoner 12819 Maytab and prisoner 10817 Choi Toon came the closest to succeeding. According to The Guardian, they stole away from the islands on March 26, 1872, rowing out into the Bay of Bengal on homemade rafts across a 750-mile stretch of turbulent water, dodging schools of bounty hunters who fought over 250 rupee rewards, which was then 25 pounds. Picked up by a British vessel, they persuaded the crew that they were shipwrecked fishermen and eventually pitched up, free, at the stranger's home for Asiatics in London. The 2 were fed, clothed, and given a bed, but while they slept, Colonel Hughes, the home's proprietor, took photographs that were circulated around the empire. One morning, Maytab and Choi Toon awoke to find themselves shackled and frog-marched aboard a ship bound for India. At number 9, Chennai's Pushal Prison. Back in the days of it being commissioned, this prison was brutal. Prisoners had no access to water and cleaned their toilets with mud. Even when they had access to water, they had to choose whether to wash themselves or their clothes. Nowadays, it seems the prison has changed its ways completely. Additional Director General General of Police and Inspector General of Prisons, Ashutosh Shukla told The Hindu, "The facilities provided to A-class prisoners are portrayed as a luxury. Mattresses, clothes, cots, tables, private cooking and eating vessels are permitted to the prisoners of A-class as per Tamil Nadu Prison Rules 1983. There is nothing unusual. If a prison can afford to wear a suit inside the prison, we can't prevent that. Wearing shorts and shoes are also permissible." The prison does have one very big problem that seems to keep rearing its head. Prisoners keep getting cell phones somehow and taking hilarious selfies in their cell. The prison authorities removed 18 television sets after they found that inmates were using the USB ports in them to charge mobile phones brought in illegally, sources said. At number 8, Moradabad Central Jail, Uttar Pradesh. This prison has a maximum capacity of 650 inmates, but actually houses 2,200 prisoners. As they all share cells, they sleep in shifts. The lucky ones get their own cell, which is only 6 feet by 2 feet. For comparison, the average American cell size is 50 to 70 square feet. What's worse? 70% of the total 300,000 inmates in India's 1,356 prisons have not been convicted of any offense. They are under trials, most of them victims of police high-handedness and a grindingly slow judicial system. Of them, nearly 2,000 have spent more than 5 years behind bars without being convicted of any crime. At number 7, Begusarai Jail in Bihar. Begusarai Jail in Bihar was such a terrifying experience for an 18-year-old Amit Kumar that he still wakes up screaming from nightmares of police boots crashing into his body and faces of hardened criminals staring at him. Kumar was released on June 13th after spending 72 days there. He was arrested on charges of facilitating a neighbor's abduction. Tortured to make him confess to the crime, he was released only after the abducted boy's body was found and another neighbor confessed to the crime. India Today conducted a massive investigation into the jails in India and discovered a huge crime ring within the biggest prisons. At number 6, Bur Jail. In Patna, almost every major crime is linked to the gang lords lodged in Bur Jail. In February 2011, under trial Bablu Mishra, accused of selling spurious liquor, was beaten to passing in Bihar's Nawada Jail at the behest of the powerful liquor mafia, which feared that Mishra would spill the beans. Bur Jail in Patna is one of the largest prisons in India, headed by Shri Jitendra Kumar. He is also known to control the illegal activities inside the prison. Kumar is a 1995 batch officer and has experience of working as the central jail superintendent for more than 10 years. He is considered a no-nonsense cop. Corruption is a large problem in India as well. Often cops accept bribes from inmates to turn a blind eye to them smuggling things behind bars. At number 5, Delhi's Tihar Jail. Tihar Jail is one of the most corrupt jails in India. Rajiv Agarwal managed to smuggle in a BlackBerry phone. It is not known how long he had the phone before it was recovered from his cell during a surprise check. A page 3 prisoner accused of a white-collar crime disclosed how he managed to use his satellite phone undetected in the prison for 2 years. According to him, life in prison can be comfortable if one has money and is not in the media glare. From pizzas to chicken from Mario's Bukhara to the best quality booze, everything can be arranged for the right price. It's just that the chicken has to be boneless and the liquor clear like gin, vodka, or white rum. I calculated that one needs about 20 million rupees a year to live comfortably in jail, the former Tihar inmate said. At number 4, Yerwada Jail, Pune. This is the famous jail that Mahatma Gandhi spent several years in during his Quit India movement. It is one of the biggest prisons in South Asia and the biggest one in the state of Maharashtra. It can house up to 5,000 prisoners at once. During his 1932 imprisonment, which started after his arrest in January 1932, Gandhi went on an indefinite fast to protest against the communal award for depressed classes on the 20th of September 1932. He discontinued his fast after signing an agreement called the Pune Pact with the leader of depressed classes, Dr. Ambedkar, in jail on the 24th of September 1932. Gandhi was released from the jail in May 1933. At number 3, Parapana Agrahara. So apparently India holds a yearly competition during a hygiene meeting to determine which prison has the most amazing hygiene out of them all. Parapana Agrahara has taken the prize. Yes, they have prizes for first place. Around 1,319 prisons from across all states and union territories had participated in the contest, which was held in Ahmedabad recently. Quality of the food, livelihood, and health of the prisoners, cleanliness inside the prison compound, maintenance of toilets and bathrooms, safety, security, and duty deployment were some of the parameters which were surveyed as part of the competition. A competition on how clean a prison is seems a bit oblivious to the reasons a prison exists for. At number 2, Madras Central Prison. Madras Central Prison used to be one of the largest prisons in India, but had all of the inmates transferred to a different prison. It was originally built to house transit convicts who were to face the Sazai Kalapani in cellular jail. In 1999, some of the inmates rioted following the passing of an inmate named Boxer Vadavelu. They set fire to a room where the assistant warden had taken refuge. Riot police were called in to contain the riots. The police initially used tear gas to quell the rioters before resorting to live ammunition. In the battle which ensued between the inmates and the riot police, 10 people, including a prison official, were executed, while more than 100 people were injured. At number 1, Sanganer Open Prison. Open prisons aren't a known concept in the West, but let me break it down. Open prisons have minimal security. Sanganer Open Prison gives prisoners 12 hours to roam every day. At the end of the day, the inmates must return for a head count. The system is completely trust-based with the prisoners. Admittance to India's open prisons is similar to how parole works in many countries. Prisoners are transferred from conventional prisons into open ones based on a range of criteria such as behavior, motivation to reform, and physical and mental fitness. Number 10, Opichort Prison. This penal institution is located in Opichort, Hokkaido Prefecture. Constructed in 1890, this prison was a staple in the culture back in 1965 for a film that came out that year titled Opichort Prison, which detailed fictional stories from the very real prison. In April 1890, the Meiji government sent over 1,000 political prisoners to the isolated Opichort village and forced them to build roads linking it to the more populous south. Initial conditions were extremely harsh, with insufficient food and rest, and over 200 prisoners passed away from malnutrition, accidents, and as punishment for attempting to escape. Opichort Prison later became known for being a self-sufficient farming prison and was cited as a model for others throughout Japan. The prisoners who were held there included politicians, activists, spies for the Soviet Army, and former Yakuza. The prison now has a museum dedicated to the legacy of the prison and its notable prisoners, and is the only prison museum in Japan. Number 9, the Tokyo Detention House. The Tokyo Detention House is located in the Katsushika Prefecture in Tokyo and is operated by the Ministry of Justice. This prison contains one of only 7 execution chambers in Japan. All executions in Japan are carried out by hanging. The execution chamber in Tokyo has a trap door which is operated by one of the 3 buttons in the next door room, which are simultaneously pressed by 3 prison staff members so that none of them will know who activated the drop. Before entering the execution chamber, the condemned person passes a Buddhist statue of Kannon, a bodhisattva associated with compassion. The execution chamber has 2 sections, with both of them together no larger than a 15 tatami mat room. When the execution happens, the body drops into a room below the execution chamber. It is in this room where execution is confirmed. The prison's main purpose is to detain people awaiting for trial, convicted felons, and those sentenced to execution. Number 8, Osaka Detention Center. Osaka Detention Center is a correctional facility in Miyakajimaku, Osaka. This prison is another with an execution room, used to hang notable executioners. Osaka Detention Center was in the Japan Times for a controversy in 2019, where it was reported that some essential things for prisoners were much too expensive than normal. This is what they said in the article. Tissue paper and other daily products sold at Osaka Prison are so expensive that inmates mostly cannot purchase them, a situation amounting to a human rights violation. According to local lawyers, the Osaka Bar Association advised the prison to make improvements in a statement dated March 29th, after finding that 800 pieces of tissue were being sold inside the prison for 594 yen, some 4.5 times higher than the market price. Number 7, Nagoya Detention House. This correctional facility is located in Higashiku, Nagoya, housing one very notable inmate, Tsukasa Kanda. Tsukasa was one of 3 people who executed a woman after parking a van on a road waiting for someone to ambush. The other 2 people involved were Kawagishi and Hori. They found their victim and robbed her of her ATM cards before hitting her in the head with a hammer approximately 30 times, while simultaneously choking her with a rope. Capital punishment is a legal penalty for executioners in Japan, but the general sentencing guideline means that execution sentences are not usually passed for a single execution committed. Fumiko Isogai, whose only child was executed in this crime, launched a campaign to call for the execution penalty for the 3 executioners in September 2007. Within 10 days, her petition was signed by 100,000 citizens. She presented her petition for the execution penalty with some 150,000 signatures to the District Public Prosecutor's Office of Nagoya on the 23rd of October 2007. About 318,000 citizens had signed her petition by December 2008. Although single executioners rarely face an execution sentence in Japan, It was expected that the recent trend towards stricter punishments, backed by the growing public support for capital punishment, would encourage the court to sentence Kanda and Hori to execution. Kawagishi's and Kanda's fathers also asked the court to sentence their sons to execution. Kanda was then sent to Nagoya Detention House and hung for his crime. Number 6. Kusatsu Special Prison. Kusatsu Special Prison was a prison that operated between 1938 and 1947 in Kuryu Rakusen-en Sanatorium in Kusatsu Onsen, Kusatsu Town, Gunma Prefecture, Japan, where criminals in public leprosariums throughout Japan were imprisoned. Prisons for conventional crimes had been built earlier in all public leprosariums. 22 out of 93 prisoners passed away of cold or maltreatment in the cells or after confinement. In Japanese, it was called Tokubetsu Byoshutsu, which translates to special ward, or Ju Kanbo, which translates to prison for severe crimes. There were 8 independent cells. Each cell was less than 4.5 meters in size, with wooden floors with a hole in it as a latrine. There was a small hole for the distribution of meals. There was no heating system. The cells had tall walls and were physically separate from each other, each cell being a separate building entity. The temperature would often reach negative 20 degrees Celsius. Administration, maintenance, and repression were roles partaken by male nurses. Number 5. Kikuchi Medical Prison. In 1909, the first public leprosariums, or sanatoriums, started in Japan, with wandering leprosy patients which included criminals. In 1915, the treatment of criminals was discussed by directors of leprosariums. In 1916, the decisions of confinement and custody could be made by the directors of leprosariums, such as imprisonment of less than 30 days within leprosariums and reduction of meals. Between 1912 and 1951, there were various riots within the leprosariums. In 1939, a special prison was started within the Kusatsu leprosarium, which led to the Kusatsu Special Prison Incident. In August 1947, members of the Japan Communist Party visited the special ward and found that 22 criminals passed away in the special ward or after imprisonment. However, responsible persons could not be punished. Discussions by diet men, officials of the Ministry of Welfare, and directors of leprosariums and representatives of leprosy patients agreed on the necessity of a prison. Number 4. Fuchu Prison. It is located in the city of Fuchu, Tokyo, to the west of the center of Tokyo metropolis. Before the end of WW2, Fuchu Prison held communist leaders, members of banned religious sects, and leaders of the Korean independence movement. Fuchu Prison was opened in June 1935, after the need for a new and larger prison was determined by the Home Ministry, in a review following the 1923 Great Kanto earthquake, during which Tokyo's main prison, Sugamo Prison, was destroyed. During the pre-conflict period, the prison also housed many political prisoners as well as common criminals. After the conflict, the prison was visited by Harold Isaacs of Newsweek, French correspondent Robert Ghislaine, John K. Emerson, E. Herbert Norman, and Dome reporter Tei Tataishi. The 1968 300 million yen robbery took place outside of the walls of the prison. The prison was home to former Yakuza, foreign inmates, and executioners. Number 3. Tokushima Prison. Tokushima, 520 kilometers west of Tokyo, converted a building to house elderly inmates, putting itself at the forefront of an effort to cope with Japan's graying prisoner population. The prison holds prisoners all the way into their old age, not even letting them leave then. "I have a heart condition and used to collapse often at the prison factory," said an 81-year-old inmate at Tokushima, imprisoned for life for ending a taxi driver's life and injuring another person 6 decades ago. Prison rules forbid publishing his name. Number 2. Sugamo Prison. The rules at Sugamo Prison are strict. The jailers were inside the prison cell block with the prisoners, and the guards were stationed outside anywhere from towers to hallways to entrances. No hands were to be laid on the prisoners unless there was a dire emergency. There were no problems. Each prisoner had a single cell to himself. A jailer watched them 24 hours, unless they had been removed for court. The prisoners were required to sleep with a dim light on, and their hands had to be outside of the covers. They were allowed 1 hour of exercise a day and could communicate with each other for brief amounts of time. One of the major concerns was prisoner self-harm, yet in the cell block with the older men, there had been no attempts for anyone to take their own life. Number 1. Yamaguchi Jail. The nation's first prison operated by the private sector opened in Mine, Yamaguchi Prefecture. The Mine Social Return Promotion Center, built on 28 hectares, does not have any inmates yet. It will soon begin accepting prisoners serving time for their first criminal offense. The prison has the capacity to hold 500 men and 500 women. I hope you will live up to expectations and trust toward realizing safe communities by offering high-quality correctional education, making use of private sector creativity. Justice Minister Gina Nagase said in an inauguration speech. The government has consigned most of the prison's operation, including security, job training, and cleaning, to an operating company set up by concerns including a major security firm. The 51.7 billion yen contract runs for 20 years. At number 10, Cheboksari Prison. This prison is considered to be the oldest prison in Russia. The infamous ruler of Russia, Ivan the Terrible, ordered the original construction of this prison out of wood in 1555. In the year 1646, the prison was rebuilt in stone. There's a legend that Stepan Razin, leader of the 1670 to 1671 peasant riot, was held briefly in the Cheboksari prison while en route to his execution in Moscow. The fortress was built there to facilitate Moscow Tsardom's presence in these lands, subdue the local Tatar tribes, and make them pay tributes. At number 9, Butyrka Prison Castle. Varlam Shalamov notes in one of his tales that the Butyrka is extremely hot in summer. Edward Limonov in his drama Passing in the Police Van emphatically agrees. He says that with the collapse of the Soviet regime, overcrowding has become a real issue. There are more than 100 inmates in cells meant to contain 10 people. Most of these people are politically unreliable subjects from the Caucasus. Since epidemics are a problem, the wardens try to fill cells entirely with people with AIDS or with tuberculosis. However, this does little to curb the problem, since many inmates are substance users, and there's at most one needle per cell. Moreover, inmates are brought to the tribunal in overcrowded police vans, so that healthy inmates are exposed to tuberculosis. At number 8, Matryoshkaya Tishina Prison. The name of this Moscow prison has an interesting history. The street where it is located also bears the name Matryoshkaya Tishina, which means the sailor's silence. Since Peter and the Great's time, sailors were settled on the banks of Yauza River there, and in 1771, a hospice for veterans of the Russian fleet was organized. The prison, founded in 1775, was initially also a house of restraint, a special institution where people who committed crimes because of mental diseases were kept, along with debauchers, drunkards, etc. In 1870, the house of restraint was transformed into a regular prison. At number 7, Cresty Crosses Prison. Although it is permanently closed now, built in 1893, this vast red brick complex was originally Europe's largest solitary confinement facility and used to hold political prisoners, including Trotsky in 1905, and in October 1917, the entire provisional government. Later in the Soviet period, it was the site of the incarceration of Joseph Brodsky on charges of parasitism. Cresty has been infamous in recent years for chronic overcrowding, TB infection, and corruption. At number 6, Vladimir Central Prison. This prison was founded in Vladimir in 1783 during Catherine the Great's reign. It was initially built as a labor house for petty criminals, but in 1906 it became a central prison, a specially guarded and fortified detention facility. Here, the most dangerous and important convicts were held, and during the prison's history, no jailbreaks out of here were registered. Currently, the Vladimir Central Prison is a special security prison. It is also famous in criminal folklore because of the eponymous song by Russian urban criminal, chant and singer Mikhail Krug. At number 5, Vologda, Russia's Pyatak Prison. Inside the prison walls of Russia's Alcatraz, you can find the country's most dangerous criminals. With the state of the prison facility in Pyatak, they'd come out even worse how they came in. That's if they even came out. A prison psychologist said that the place destroys a person's hope and the person itself. During the first 9 months of staying there, the inmates begin to adapt to the solitary and psychological torture. After 4 to 5 years, an inmate's personality would begin to deteriorate. According to the psychologist, no one can survive being stuck there for 25 years. You would not come out without being psychologically destroyed. At number 4, Black Eagle. In the USSR, Black Eagle was the only colony for prisoners on deceased row. But since 1997, the deceased penalty has been suspended. Today, Black Eagle prisoners are divided into 2 groups. Those whose punishment was mitigated to 25 years imprisonment, and those serving a life sentence. Prisoners serving a life sentence live in separate buildings, usually in cells for 1 or 2. They're kept inside for 23 hours a day with an hour to walk in a special room without a roof. Prisoners sleep with the lights on, and during the day, lying in bed is prohibited. At number 3, White Swan. White Swan was founded in 1938 as a penal colony for the Soviet Union to hold political prisoners, particularly priests, but was eventually used for common criminals as well. In 1955, a special decree of the CPSU Central Committee changed the colony to correct the so-called thieves in law, and the main task of the prison was the total isolation and closure of all methods of communication between prisoners and the outside world. The Soviet authorities began to staff White Swan with some of the highest quality correctional officers in the country to control the thieves-in-law. To control the thieves-in-law in order to be able to withstand the bribes and intimidation. In 1999, White Swan was repurposed to house serious criminals serving life sentences and, unlike previous detainees, were not expected to ever leave the facility. The prison has roughly 300 inmates, 1/3 of its maximum capacity, held in cells of 1, 2, and 3 people. All cells have a dossier containing photos, articles, and brief biography of the detainees. White Swan was the first prison in Russia to feature an on-site professional psychologist, and the administration, after studying the prisoners, settles them based on psychological compatibility in order to avoid conflicts. The conditions of the prison supposedly correspond to the requirements of international standards, with a library, correspondence materials, a commissary, a weekly shower, and an hour-long walk per day. During White Swan's entire existence, there have been no confirmed escapes. At number 2, Polar Owl Prison. Also known as Yamalo-Nenets Autonomous Okrug, this prison is one of 7 supermax labor colonies operated by the federal government. There were reports in the media that some employees of the colony were involved in a scandal with the falsification of a confession. Some unscrupulous guards were suspected of beating testimonies from prisoners with the use of physical and psychological violence. Novaya Gazeta reported 190 fake turnouts, while Izvestia reported 32 fake turnouts. According to Novaya Gazeta, the Federal Penitentiary Services for the Yamalo-Nenets Autonomous Okrug tried to hush up the case, since high-ranking officials could be involved in it. At number 1, Black Dolphin Prison. Black Dolphin Prison is a correctional facility in Sol-Iletsk, Orenburg Oblast, Russia, near its border with Kazakhstan. The prison houses approximately 700 of Russia's worst criminals. Prisoners at Black Dolphin are all serving sentences of life imprisonment. The prison began accepting these inmates on the 1st of November 2000. Inmates are kept isolated and housed in cells that have a set of 3 steel doors. For 90 minutes a day, they exercise in a large cage. During this time, cells are searched for contraband or illegal items. Inmates are also under 24-hour surveillance and supervision. They are not permitted to rest or sit on their bunks from the time they awake until bedtime. That's pretty harsh. Number 10, El Borsha Police Detention Center. It's been bad in El Borsha. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, said Alfie, a former non-league footballer from London, on a UK inmate's experience. When they took him to the CID substance unit, they beat him for an entire 5 days. He told me police officers tasered him, slapped him in the face, and all they fed him was bread and a little bit of water. He was basically tortured and put in a cell with 30 other people for 5 days.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm surviving, Mom. I'm surviving.
The UAE Public Prosecutor's Office said Mr. Hood was convicted based on evidence including the items found in his possession, information on his phone, third-party statement, and his own confession. Mr. Hood had access to an English interpreter at all relevant stages, including his questioning, confession, and trial. He was represented in his trial by a defense lawyer whom he selected. Mr. Hood has since appealed the initial ruling in accordance with UAE law and will receive a hearing at Abu Dhabi court. At all times, Mr. Hood has been treated in accordance with the UAE law and applicable international standards. Number 9, Dubai Central Jail. In a 2013 study by Reprieve, a company who tries to serve justice for the wrongfully convicted, data they've collected from 124 prisoners at Dubai Central Jail shows that the inmates are being treated terribly. Over 75% said they had been physically abused at some time after their arrest. All but 5, 96%, were subjected to questioning by police without ever having seen a lawyer, and 95% were interviewed by prosecutors without a lawyer present. 85% of prisoners said they were forced to sign documents in a language they didn't understand. Of the 78 prisoners who were later able to have these documents translated, 91% said that the documents did not accurately represent what they had said. Number 8, Dubai Women's Central Jail. The women in this prison are identified mostly by the color of their clothes, either pink or red. Those in pink clothes are serving shorter sentences, and those in red are serving time for more serious reasons. A unique facet of this jail also is the fact that there are kids in it. That's right, there are kids in this jail. They stay with their mothers in prison if no one can take care of them. Because they have to facilitate the children, the prison has a kid-friendly design, with a school and a kindergarten along with some toys for the kids to play with. Number 7, Sharjah Reformatory and Punitive Establishment. Brigadier General Ahmed Abdulaziz Shohail, director of Sharjah's Punitive and Correctional Institution, affirmed that the UAE's punitive and correctional institutions respect human rights pertaining to freedom of belief and opinion, healthcare services, and equality. He added that the institution's headquarters comprises a human rights office affiliated to the Office of the Deputy Commander-in-Chief of Sharjah Police, who is mandated with ensuring prisoners' human rights are protected. In an exclusive interview with the Emirates news agency, WAM, Brigadier General Shuhail said, "As part of the Directorate General of Punitive and Correctional Establishments at the Ministry of Interior, we seek to achieve several goals, starting with implementing the penalties set forth by legislators and the reform process, and ending with the prisoner's return to his normal life as productive member of society." Number 6. Al-Watba. Overcrowded cells, cruel guards, indiscriminate violence. We have all seen and heard the cliches used to describe prisons in the Middle East, and Al-Watba defies every one of them. It is closer to a residential detention center, with living quarters, a clean and well-kept kitchen, a library, a theater, and a workshop. Built 35 years ago, Al-Watba, about 40 minutes outside of Abu Dhabi City, is the largest and oldest of the Emirates' 5 prisons. Men's and women's quarters are separated by large metal gates and tight security, but beyond the gates, the women's quarters are decorated with murals of pelicans, falcons, and forts. Number 5. Fujairah Jail Facilities. This one is weird. It's a jail facility offering services to anyone willing to pay for them. Fujairah Jail Facilities offers its products and services to customers both local and other parts of Fujairah. This is growing day by day. Fujairah Jail Facilities goes the extra mile to offer its products and services online to increase customer reach. People working here in Fujairah Jail Facility are well trained in problem solving and good market knowledge, with experience in Fujairah and business, treating customers with kindness and good manners. Although they sell services and various products, it doesn't say anywhere on their website what exactly they're selling. Number 4. Al Razin. In the middle of the desert, about 110 kilometers from UAE capital Abu Dhabi, behind the glittering towers is Al Razin Prison. Considered the most notorious prison in the Arab world, according to World Prison Brief's classification, Al Razin, nicknamed the Guantanamo of the UAE, was built in the era of Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan as an addiction treatment center. However, since 2011, it has turned into a prison for revenge acts against political opponents and human rights defenders, and is one of the symbols of human rights violations in the Arab world. The DGPCE monitors Al Razin in a formal way by having a person visit the prison monthly to check the number of detainees. And when they complain to him about violations, he replies, "You deserve what happens to you. It's a natural consequence of your betrayal." Number 3. Ajman Central Prison. In this prison in the UAE, some few prisoners are now being a part of a trial service. The trial service includes testing a new way to have money be effective in the prison, even adding a smart supermarket to jail grounds. Lieutenant Colonel Mohammed Mubarak Al-Ghafli, director of APRE, said that the management is making efforts to achieve the Ministry of Interior's strategic goal of ensuring the provision of administrative services in accordance with standards of quality, efficiency, and transparency, and to enhance the process of resource management and support. Families of inmates can go to any branch of Ajman Bank in the country and deposit the amount of money they wish to send by providing the name and number of an inmate. Number 2. Punitive and Correctional Institution. Most prisons just say they're rehabilitating inmates and preparing them for release if they behave properly, but this prison actually is rehabilitating inmates with programs to help them. A program consisting of a number of workshops and other therapeutic rehabilitative activities comprising the skills necessary for the individual to handle themselves and others, with these skills broken down as follows: communication and interpersonal skills, decision-making and critical thinking skills, adaptation and self-management skills, other awareness raising and training lectures as required by the participant group sessions, and even yoga. At number 1, Al-Awir Deportation Jail. This jail is where inmates are held when they are deported from the UAE but cannot afford a plane ticket out. Popular individual Bobby Wine has a charity fund for getting plane tickets to the deportees held in the jail. They said this on Twitter: "After our cancelled charity concert, we visited sisters being held at Al-Awir Deportation Jail, Dubai. All they need is a flight home for approximately $200 US. Here alone are 600 African girls, 200 Ugandans, and 400 other nationalities, away from the other 20 detention centers. The former MP at the Parliament of Uganda really cares about his people." Number 10. Alcatraz. There have never been any successful escapes from Alcatraz. 36 inmates put the inescapable title given to Alcatraz to the test, 23 of whom were recaptured, 6 of them were shot, and 5 went missing and were presumed drowned. The US Army began incarcerating military prisoners inside the new fortress in the late 1850s. During the Civil War, prisoners included Union deserters and Confederate sympathizers. The cells were also used to imprison Native Americans who had land disagreements with the federal government, American soldiers who deserted to the Filipino cause during the Spanish-American War, and Chinese civilians who resisted the army during the Boxer Rebellion. Number 9. Black Dolphin. Black Dolphin Prison is a correctional facility in Sol-Ilitsk, Orenburg Oblast, Russia, near its border with Kazakhstan. The prison houses approximately 700 of Russia's worst criminals. Prisoners at Black Dolphin are all serving sentences of life imprisonment. The prison began accepting these inmates on the 1st of November 2000. Inmates are kept isolated and housed in cells that have a set of 3 steel doors. For 90 minutes a day, they exercise in a large cage. During this time, cells are searched for contraband and illegal items. Inmates are also under 24-hour surveillance and supervision. They are not permitted to rest or sit on their bunks from the time they awake until bedtime. Number 8. Guantanamo Bay. Guantanamo Bay, or Gitmo, became the focus of worldwide controversy over alleged violations of the legal rights of detainees under the Geneva Conventions and accusations of torture or abusive treatment of detainees by US authorities. Most detainees were captured in Afghanistan or along the border with Pakistan in the early days of the US invasion. Many were reportedly caught by US allies and handed over in exchange for bounties that ran into the thousands of dollars. Some were held and interrogated by the CIA for months or years at undisclosed locations, commonly referred to as black sites, before their transfers to Guantanamo. Number 7. ADX Florence. ADX Florence is the most infamous supermax facility in the world. It holds the most notorious criminals in history, including El Chapo. El Chapo has escaped prison twice while being held by Mexican authorities in 2015 and 2001, but never while being held at ADX. Nicknamed the Alcatraz of the Rockies, no one has escaped the facility located in the high desert about 2 hours south of Denver since it opened in 1994. Inmates are housed in soundproof 7 by 12 foot cells for 23 hours of the day on permanent lockdown, with no contact with other inmates. Staff members are carefully vetted and have little direct contact with the inmates. Number 6. Kamiti Maximum Security Prison. Kenya is known for its harsh prison conditions, but Kamiti is by far the worst. It is notoriously overcrowded and the conditions are unsanitary. The prison's official capacity is 1,200, though reports suggest there are between 1,800 and 2,500 inmates crammed inside. Though Kamiti was already well known for housing political prisoners, infamy grew in 2008 when a riot sparked by a contraband search was captured on cell phone and shown on television. It also made headlines again in 2021 when 3 convicted terror suspects escaped. 7 wardens were later arrested for helping aid their escape. Number 5. San Quentin. The oldest prison in California, San Quentin is notoriously known for its violence. It has been home to many infamous criminals, including Charles Manson, Scott Peterson, and Sirhan Sirhan, who assassinated Robert F. Kennedy. In early 2022, the state started the process of closing the deceased row and relocating the inmates, 3 years after the California governor ended executions in the state. Over the years, and particularly in the 1960s and 70s, San Quentin earned a reputation for corruption and interracial riots that were encouraged by the guards. Number 4. Mendoza Prison in Argentina. With a population roughly 3 times its capacity, Mendoza Prison in Argentina is severely overcrowded. As many as 5 inmates are crowded into cells that measure only 43 square feet, and many inmates are forced to sleep on the floor without mattresses. Amnesty International reported on the conditions back in 2005, alerting that people imprisoned in Mendoza are in such a desperate situation that they have gone as far as to sew their mouths up in demand of better living conditions. Prisoners had inadequate medical care, and the prison lacked a proper sewage system, forcing inmates no other choice but to use plastic bags and bottles as their washrooms. Number 3. Camp 14 Kacheon, North Korea. Near the middle of North Korea is a 60 square mile prison facility known both as Camp 14 and Kacheon. According to reports by the US Department of State, Camp 14 was built in 1959 near the center of the country, about 40 miles north of Pyongyang. Camp 14 is considered a political prisoner camp and can hold up to 15,000 prisoners. That means they are serving life sentences for being enemies of the state. Inmates here are routinely starved and forced into labor in mining, textiles, and farming. Number 2. Gitarama Prison in Rwanda. The most crowded prison in the world, Gitarama is home to more than 7,000 prisoners in a facility that was built to only house 400. Most of the inmates are suspects of the Rwandan mass execution that took place in 1994. Given the extreme overcrowding, the men and women housed here are forced to stand barefoot on the filthy ground for all hours of the day, causing their feet to rot. Many eventually require amputations, but with only one full-time doctor dedicated to the prison, most prisoners are unable to receive the treatment they need, resulting in half a dozen passings each day. Number 1. White Swan Prison in Russia. The Soviet authorities began to staff White Swan with some of the highest quality correctional officers in the country to control the thieves in law, in order to be able to withstand the bribes and intimidation. In 1999, White Swan was repurposed to house serious criminals serving life sentences, and unlike previous detainees, were not expected to ever leave the facility. The prison has roughly 300 inmates, 1/3 of its maximum capacity, held in cells of 1, 2, and 3 people. All cells have a dossier containing photos, articles, and a brief biography of the detainees. At number 10, overcrowding. Thousands of inmates are housed in supermax facilities. Most of these facilities are, however, overcrowded. Often multiple dangerous inmates are held in the same cell, one that is tiny compared to normal cells. The issues associated with prison overcrowding are not new and have been brewing for many years. In many prison systems, detainees do not have the minimum space requirements recommended by international standards, and in some cases spending up to 23 hours of the day, if not all day, in overcrowded cells. Overcrowding can be so severe that prisoners sleep in shifts, on top of each other, share beds, or tie themselves to window bars so that they can sleep while standing. At number 9, how many guards there really are. This one is more scary for the guards than the inmates. Most prisons, like I said, are very, very overcrowded. This means that there is a huge disparity in the number of guards and inmates. Sometimes the ratio of guards to inmates is as crazy as only 1 guard to 100 inmates. This means that if things got out of hand, perhaps during a prison break, riot, or even just a fight, the guards could be overwhelmed. This has happened before and could happen in the future as well. Although the conditions in supermax facilities are hard for prisoners, that doesn't mean they can't find a way to cause chaos. If a fight or a riot were to ensue, the entire prison could be engulfed in it, and the guards would be beaten. At number 8, amnesties. In some countries, only periodic amnesties and pardons relieve overcrowding. While these provide short-term relief, they do not offer a sustainable solution and can erode public confidence in the criminal justice system. In others, costly prison building programs are undertaken to meet the growing demands for prison places. In 2020, many prison systems announced unprecedented mass releases of people in prison to reduce overcrowding and the risk of the transmission of a virus in places of detention. I'm not so sure how effective an amnesty is for overcrowding, but letting the most violent criminals closer to society is probably not a good idea. At number 7, what you do in them. Prisoners of maximum security prisons across the world almost all share one thing in common. They always have nothing to do. Most of the supermax prisons all have very strict rules against prisoners doing things. Inmates have 23 hours in their cells every day with only 1 hour per day in a different cell designed for working out. Reports state that sometimes on the weekends they don't even get the 1 hour to work out and instead just stay in their cells for the entire day. Another report says that some prisons around the world don't allow prisoners to even sit or lay in their beds after they wake up. They must stand in their cells doing almost nothing at all. At number 6, hygiene. One correctional officer has this to say about the smell inside of a maximum security prison. Having a bunch of adult individuals in such close quarters can breed some insane smells. I'm sure you can imagine, it's almost like living in a locker room. Ew. One report says that sometimes the inmates aren't even allowed to shower. If they are allowed to shower, it's only once a week. I personally couldn't handle that. I don't know anyone who could. At number 5, the most infamous supermax prison, ADX Florence. El Chapo has escaped from prison twice while being held by Mexican authorities in 2015 and 2001. But ADX is different. Nicknamed the Alcatraz of the Rockies, no one has escaped the facility located in the high desert about 2 hours south of Denver since it has opened in 1994. Inmates are housed in soundproof 7 by 12-foot cells for 23 hours of the day in permanent lockdown, with no contact with other inmates. Staff members are carefully vetted and have little direct contact with inmates. At number 4, how it feels to be in one. Current C1 columnist Robert Hood, who served as ADX warden from 2002 to 2005, described life in ADX in stark terms to CNN. As soon as they come through the door, you see it in their faces. That's when it really hits you. You're looking at the beauty of the Rocky Mountains in the backdrop. When you get inside, that is the last time you will ever see it. The supermax is life after passing. It's long term. In my opinion, it's far much worse than passing away. And that's the opinion of a warden there. Imagine what the prisoners think. At number 3, how many supermax prisons there are. In the United States, there is only one supermax facility left standing today. That prison is ADX Florence, the same prison where El Chapo, as mentioned before, will spend the rest of his life. In Florence, Colorado, the prison houses up to only 400 inmates, all with an extremely good reason to be there. Prisoners there include Dzhokhar Tsarnaev and Zacharias Moussaoui. I can't say who they are, but if you know, you know. At number 2, what they do to the prisoners. Supermax prisons around the world have always been known for their poor treatment of inmates. Usually that would include torture, either physical or mental. The fact that they would never see the outside world again alone would completely break the prisoners almost to a point of no return. This mental torture would spiral them into being completely emotionless and hollow, or turn them extremely violent. At number 1, the security. All cells are soundproofed to try and prevent prisoners from communicating with one another. The windows are 4x4 and are designed to prevent inmates from knowing their specific location within the complex. They can see only the sky and the roof through them. so it is virtually impossible to plan an escape. Those who are in a supermax prison are placed not as a punishment of their crimes, but by their previous history when incarcerated or based on reliable evidence of an impending disruption, such as a gang leader or the leader of a radical movement. These decisions are made as administrative protection measures, and the prisoners in a supermax are deemed by correctional workers as a threat to the safety and security of the institution itself.